The air inside the grand throne chamber of the alien capital was heavy, with the smell of strange incense and the faint hum of energy that flowed through the crystalline walls towering high above the heads of all who entered. Mark stood at the far end of the room, feeling the eyes of dozens of alien guards upon him, each guard tall and armored in plates that glimmered faintly like the shells of great insects, their gaze unblinking as they studied the lone human who had been brought here. Not as a prisoner, but not quite as a guest either. Beside him stood Rin, the alien warrior who had fought beside him on a distant world, and whose presence now was the reason for this gathering, the reason why the whispers and rumors had spread through the empire like wildfire. The throne itself was raised high upon a platform of dark stone, polished to a mirror shine, and there upon it sat the alien queen, her form draped in flowing silk that shimmered between colors with every movement of the light. Her eyes, deep and glowing like molten metal, fixed themselves on Rin and then on Mark, and when she spoke her voice rolled across the chamber with a weight that could be felt in the bones. She told them that she had heard the rumors that her warrior had formed an impossible connection with a human, something that had never been seen or accepted within her realm. She rose slightly from her throne, and her gaze cut through the distance as she said the words that seemed to hang in the air longer than they should have. The rumors were true. You have bonded with the human, and this bond is not a small thing. It is not without meaning. It is not without consequence. Mark felt the weight of her words press upon him, though he did not fully understand the traditions of her people. He could see that this bond was something that carried great importance. Rin did not bow nor look away. Instead, he stood firm, his chest rising and falling with slow, controlled breaths, and Mark could sense through instinct, or perhaps through something deeper, that his friend would not break under this judgment. The chamber remained silent after her words. No one moved, not even the guards, who stood like statues as if waiting for a command, or perhaps for the next breath from their queen. The hum in the air seemed louder now as the queen leaned forward, her long fingers resting upon the edge of her throne, her eyes fixed on them both, and with a voice that was quieter yet sharper than before she asked, "Do you understand what this means for both our species?" And the question carried a weight that told Mark and Rin that whatever they said next could shape the fate of two worlds. The queen's question echoed in Mark's mind, but before he could speak, his thoughts drifted back to the place where everything began, far away from this shining capital, on a world covered in dust and shadows. A place where the sky burned orange during the day and turned a deep bruised violet at night. It was there, in the middle of chaos and smoke, that he had first met Rin, the alien warrior whose armor was dented from battle and whose movements carried the grace of one born to fight. Mark had been part of a small human team sent to recover lost supplies from a ruined outpost, but they had walked into a trap. The air was filled with the sound of weapons fire, and the ground shook with every explosion. In the middle of that storm of danger, he had seen Rin cornered by enemy forces, their weapons ready to strike. Mark could have turned away, he could have hidden, but something in him refused to watch another living being fall, and so he ran forward, the heat of the battle biting into his skin as he fired at the attackers and pulled Rin from their grasp. It was not the act of a soldier following orders. It was the act of a person seeing someone in need and acting without thought. Rin had stared at him with eyes that reflected both surprise and something Mark could not name. In that moment, they fought side by side, pushing back the enemy until the last of them fled into the wasteland. Days that followed were not easier. They were stranded together, cut off from both their forces, with nothing but the wreckage of the outpost and the barren land around them. The heat of the day was merciless, and the nights were colder than ice, but they found ways to survive. Mark taught Rin how to make fire with the broken fragments of metal and crystal lying in the ruins, and Rin showed Mark how to find water hidden beneath the cracked ground. They shared food when there was little to eat. They took turns keeping watch under the strange stars, and slowly, without either of them planning it, the barrier of silence between them began to break one night as they rested in the ruins of an old shelter. A storm swept over the wasteland with a force that made the walls tremble, and it was then as lightning tore across the sky that Mark felt something strange, a sudden rush of thought that was not his own. Rin had looked at him with an expression that told him the same had happened to him. They had no words for it, but somehow they could feel each other's emotions, faint and unsteady at first, but growing clearer with every passing day. It was not just friendship, and it was not just survival. It was a connection neither human nor alien had ever spoken of before. When rescue finally came, and the two were brought back to their people, they had already known that what they shared would not be easy to explain. The bond was invisible, but it was there, stronger than either of them understood. And as they stepped onto the alien ship under the eyes of watching soldiers, Mark had felt a flicker of unease because he knew the world would not see this the way they did. And that was when the first whispers began, the rumors that had now reached the throne of the Queen. The journey back to the alien capital had not been a quiet one, for as soon as Mark and Rin stepped onto the shining platforms of the great city, the whispers began to weave through the streets like invisible threads carried from mouth to mouth by merchants, soldiers, and officials alike. They spoke of the human who walked beside one of the Queen's warriors, not as an ally in war, but as something closer, far closer than tradition allowed. And the rumors grew heavier with every passing day until they reached the ears of the council, who ruled under the Queen's authority, and they summoned the pair to answer questions. The council chamber was not like the throne room. It was darker, lined with great carved pillars and lit by hanging orbs that glowed with a cold light. 10 members of the council sat in a half circle, their faces hidden by masks that gleamed faintly as they watched Mark and Rin approach. The questions came sharp, and without pause they asked Rin if the bond was real, if it had been forced, if the human had used some trick to weave himself into her mind. They asked Mark if he understood the danger of such a connection, if he knew the history of their people, and why such things had been forbidden for generations. Neither of them wavered. Mark spoke with the steady voice of someone who had lived the truth, and Rin stood beside him, her answers carrying the weight of honor. Yet outside the chamber, forces moved in shadow. There were those in the city who saw this bond not as a bridge, but as a threat to be cut away before it grew stronger. One such faction whispered in back rooms that the bond could be used as proof that humans sought to infiltrate alien minds and take control of their warriors. Others spoke that the Queen's rule would weaken if she allowed one of her kind to break ancient custom. And some among them plotted to remove the human before the Queen could make her final decision. It was during one such gathering in the Grand Hall where leaders from across the Empire met that the first attempt was made. Mark and Rin stood near the edge of the assembly, the voices of diplomats rising and falling around them, when suddenly Rin's head turned, her eyes sharp and unblinking. Mark felt it then, a sudden flash in his mind, like the echo of a thought that was not his own, a warning. Without words he moved, without knowing why, stepping back, just as a blade of shimmering energy cut through the space where he had been standing. The crowd erupted in shouts, and guards surged forward, seizing the would-be assassin whose face was hidden beneath a hood. In the silence that followed, the Queen entered the hall, her gaze sweeping over the scene and falling upon the pair standing unharmed, yet shaken. Her eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in calculation, for she knew now that the bond was more than simple closeness. It was a link that allowed them to sense danger before it struck, and such a thing could be either the greatest gift to her people or the spark that lit a war. No one could control the Queen, could no longer allow the whispers to decide the fate of this matter, and so she summoned Mark and Rin to the Hall of Echoes, a place older than the city itself, carved deep into the crystal heart of the mountain. It was said that in this place, the walls remembered every voice, every word, and every thought that had ever been spoken within, and those memories could not be hidden here. She declared that they would face the trial of truth, an ancient test designed to strip away lies and reveal the bond between beings. In its purest form, the council gathered in a high ring above the trial floor, their masked faces staring down while the queen herself stood at the center, her staff of authority in hand. The trial began with the first test, the sharing of pain. Rin was placed in one circle and Mark in another, separated by a barrier of shimmering energy. Each was told they would be struck with controlled surges of force, and if the bond was real, the other would feel it too. As the first wave hit Rin, Mark gasped, his body flinching with the same pain, though nothing had touched him, and when the wave struck Mark, Rin's legs buckled under the same unseen blow. The council members leaned forward, watching closely, recording every reaction. The second test was of memory. A device was lowered from the ceiling, its many strands of light wrapping around their heads, sinking into their minds. It searched for the moments they had lived together, and projected them into the air for all to see. There was the day in the wasteland when Mark had pulled Rin from the enemy's grip, the night under the shattered sky, when they had shared warmth against the bitter cold, the silent exchange during the storm, when their thoughts had first touched. The images hung in the air, clear and vivid, and the murmurs of the council grew louder, for these were not the rehearsed scenes of a lie, but the raw truth of survival and trust. The final test was the crossing of thought. They were told to stand still, eyes closed, and to reach for each other without words or movement, and the silence that followed was deep as the mountain itself. Mark felt the hum in his mind growing brighter, like a flame carried by the wind. He felt Rin's presence not as a voice but as a steady rhythm, a heartbeat that was not his own. He let his thoughts drift toward her, and felt them answered by warmth and strength. They stood like that for what felt like hours, until the queen raised her staff and the light barrier dissolved. The trial had proven what some had feared, and others had hoped. The bond was real, unbroken, and deeper than the oldest records of their people. Yet the test had revealed something more hidden beneath the surface of their shared thoughts. There had been flashes of an image. Neither of them recognized a vast shape moving in the dark beyond the stars, a presence that stirred the air with dread. The queen had seen it too, her eyes narrowing as she studied them, for she knew this vision was not the creation of their minds, but a warning of something that approached from the far edge of the void. Hall of Echoes lay in silence as the queen lowered her staff, the shimmering lights fading until only the soft glow of the crystal walls remained. The council waited, their masked faces turned toward her, ready to hear the judgment that would shape the future of both peoples. Mark stood still beside Rin, feeling the weight of the moment pressing on his chest. Yet beneath the tension, there was a steady thread of calm that flowed through the bond they shared, the same calm that had carried them through storms and battle, the same calm that now seemed to whisper that no matter what came they would face it together. The queen's gaze moved slowly across the chamber, touching the council, the guards, and finally resting on the two who stood before her. She spoke with a voice that filled the space without effort. She said that the trial had shown a truth that could not be denied. The bond between the human and the warrior was real and unbroken, and though it defied the oldest customs of her people, it was also a gift that could not be cast aside. She told the council that to reject such a thing would be to reject the chance for understanding between worlds, and that the survival of their kind might one day depend on such bonds. Council did not all agree. Some shifted in their seats, their silence heavy with discontent, but the people gathered beyond the chamber had already heard the whispers of what had happened inside the trial, and they began to speak among themselves, not in fear, but in wonder, for stories of survival and unity had a way of taking root quickly, especially when they carried the weight of truth. The queen knew this, and with a single command, she declared that the bond would be recognized and protected by the law of the empire from this day forward. As proof, the single command, she declared that the bond would be recognized and protected by the law of the empire from this day forward. The words echoed through the hall. The tension seemed to break like a wave. Rin turned to Mark, and though no words passed between them, the connection in their minds was a quiet roar of shared relief and determination. Yet even in that moment, They both felt the faint shadow of the vision they had seen during the trial, the great shape. Moving in the dark, between the stars, the sense of a cold, vast presence drawing nearer. The queen stepped down from her place and stood before them. Her eyes meeting theirs with a weight that spoke of decisions yet to come. She told them that their bond would be more than a symbol, it would be a bridge between species. A line of trust that could not be forged by treaties or trade. She spoke of the need for them to travel beyond the edges of known space, to seek the truth of the shadow that had touched their thoughts. She warned them that the path would be dangerous, and that what they found might change everything, but she also said that perhaps this bond was not the breaking of tradition, but the first step toward the survival of both. Their peoples Mark and Rin bowed their heads not out of submission, but out of respect, and as they turned to leave the hall, the murmurs of the crowd rose like the tide, carrying the story into every corner of the empire. They walked side by side through the vast streets of the capital, the towers gleaming in the fading light above them, and though the city was alive with sound, the bond between them was a quiet, steady flame that would guide them into whatever darkness waited beyond the stars. The end.